They would later swear it was impossible. A trapped garrison with too little water, too little food, and almost no heavy weapons forces a modern army to step back in fear. A commander famous for never yielding gives an order he hates: pull the line away from the fortress. And somewhere in the middle of it all, dust-covered Australians return from the dark carrying prisoners and a satchel of enemy documents, the kind of intelligence that saves hundreds of lives. But the moment that changes everything is quieter than any battle. A message arrives ordering the defenders to stop their unauthorized night attacks, to behave properly, to stay behind the wire. Their commander reads it, folds it, and sends them out again anyway. Disclaimer: this video is a historical documentary intended for educational purposes. November 12, 1941. Tobruk, Libya. The sun hangs over the fortress like a hammer. Heat shimmers across the sand, warping the horizon until the enemy lines look like a mirage. Inside the perimeter, men move slowly, conserving sweat the way they conserve ammunition. Every mouthful of water tastes of warm tin. Every breath carries grit. Beyond the wire, German engines idle like predators that do not need to hurry. Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Bluey Carver stands on a fire step cut into hard ground, binoculars pressed to his eyes. He's an Australian infantry officer in a sweat-stained shirt, sleeves rolled up, slouch hat pulled low. His boots are the color of the desert now. Everyone's boots are. Below him, Private Lachlan Drew crouches by a battered Bren gun, swabbing dust from the feed tray with a strip of cloth. He works with the calm of someone who has cleaned tools his whole life. Not the tidy calm of a parade ground. The practical calm of a man who knows the land wins if you get careless. A British liaison officer nearby checks his watch and tries not to look annoyed. Proper doctrine says hold your trench, save your strength, wait for daylight. Proper doctrine also says you are surrounded. Carver lowers the binoculars and wipes his forearm across his brow, leaving a pale streak through the dust. Tonight, he says, voice rough, we find out if they are sleeping as well as they pretend. And when the sun finally drops, the fortress seems to shrink. The wire becomes a thin boundary between two worlds. In the German forward trenches, a sentry lights a cigarette and cups the flame. The match flares, then dies. For a moment, his face glows in the dark like a signal. If you were standing there with him, you'd think the desert is empty. Just wind and darkness. But 20 meters out, the sand is already shifting. Not from the wind. From men. Low. Silent. Moving like they have been doing this their entire lives. The first incident is small enough to dismiss. A German listening post doesn't answer a routine check. A runner is sent forward, boots sliding over packed sand. He calls out once, then again, louder, annoyed at being awake. No reply. He returns with a story he can't quite explain without sounding foolish. The second incident is harder. A patrol steps into no man's land and does not come back. Not dragged back. Not shot to pieces. Just gone. The next morning, the Germans find a dropped helmet half buried and a rifle lying neatly across a trench board as if someone placed it there on purpose. By the third night, the tone changes. German flares launch into the sky and hang, hissing, turning the desert into a pale stage for 10 seconds at a time. Each flare reveals the same thing: empty ground. No vehicles. No organized formations. Nothing the manuals warned them to watch for. Then darkness returns and the desert becomes a mouth again. On the Australian side, Captain Rafe Haskett kneels in a shallow dugout with a handful of men. His compact and wiry, raised on cattle country, with the habit of speaking only when it matters. He runs a quiet inspection. Not of medals. Of noise. A canteen that sloshes gets left behind. A buckle that clicks gets wrapped in cloth. A bayonet scabbard that can scrape metal is tied down tight. Even bootlaces are checked. In Tobruk, sound is a flare. Private Drew rubs dust into his cheeks until his skin no longer catches moonlight. Corporal Sonny Muir carries wire cutters and a coil of cloth tape. Another man has an entrenching tool strapped tight to his thigh, the blade wrapped so it won't flash. 9 men tonight. Small enough to vanish. Large enough to hurt. They slide over the lip of their trench at 1:40 a.m. The sand still holds the day's heat. It presses up against their chests as they crawl. Every motion is measured. Every pause is longer than feels natural, because the moment you rush is the moment you die. A flare rises. The Australians flatten instantly, faces turned into the dirt. Breath held. Muscles locked. The flare burns, revealing only a quiet desert and a line of wire. Then the light fades. They move again. On the German side, the sentry with the cigarette sees nothing. He shifts his weight, annoyed at the flare schedule, and looks down the line. He does not see the Australians because the Australians are not coming like an army. They are coming like hunters. By daylight, Tobruk looks like an equation. Wire. Sand. Fortifications. The sea to the north. Enemy armor around the rest. Supplies that can be counted down to the day. German Major Otto Keller stands in a shallow command dugout, reading reports with a tight jaw. Keller is an operations officer, educated, precise, trained to trust doctrine. His map is clean. His pencil lines are confident. His problem is that the night refuses to stay inside his pencil lines. The reports in front of him do not read like battlefield summaries. They read like a string of humiliations. Sentry missing. Post overrun silently. Patrol vanished. A wounded man found stumbling back with dust caked in his eyebrows, insisting the Australians rose out of the ground itself. Keller's first instinct is contempt. These are colonials, he tells his adjutant. They are not built for sustained pressure. They will break. The adjutant nods too fast, grateful for a simple answer. Across the lines, a different headquarters voice carries a similar judgment. British staff officers visit the sector, see Australians with slouch hats and blunt humor, and mistake roughness for weakness. A British staff captain watches Haskett's men return at dawn. Eyes red. Sleeves torn. Faces grimy. They lead 2 prisoners who look more shaken than injured. The staff captain's mouth tightens. This is irregular, he says. It invites retaliation. Haskett doesn't argue. He simply looks past the man at the desert and says, retaliation's easier when you can see your target. Lieutenant Colonel Carver meets with his senior NCOs in a bunker cut into hard ground. A single lamp throws long shadows. The air smells of sweat, candle smoke, and sand. Carver listens to the complaints from above. He listens to the demands for proper defensive behavior. Then he turns to the men who actually live on the wire. Sergeant Malkeen, a rangy veteran with scarred knuckles, speaks carefully. Sir, the lads can sit tight if you order it. But it eats them alive. They're better moving. Better listening. Better close. Carver doesn't tap the map where the Germans are strongest in daylight. He taps the hours of the night. You ever hunted in scrub, Captain? He asks Haskett. Haskett's mouth twitches. Yes. Did you do it at noon? Carver asks. No. Carver nods once, like the answer settles everything. That's the mistake, he says. They think we're soldiers learning a desert. We're desert men wearing soldier kit. Outside, the heat rises again. The Germans watch. The British judge. The fortress waits. But the plan is already forming, not in speeches, not in paperwork. In silence. Night comes down like a curtain. Wind drags over the sand and rattles loose tin somewhere in the ruins. The sky is hard with stars. The Mediterranean sits to the north like a dark plate, reflecting nothing. At 2:10 a.m., Haskett's raid team is moving again. This time the target is a German forward trench near a shallow depression where the sand dips and hides movement. The approach route is chosen the way a hunter chooses a path, not the shortest, the safest. Private Drew crawls at the front. Not because he is fearless, but because his eyes are better in the dark. He pauses often. Listens. Feels the sand with his fingers. A flare shoots up, hissing. Everyone freezes. If you were down there with them, you'd feel your heartbeat trying to become noise. You'd feel your throat begging for a swallow. Nobody moves. Nobody swallows. The flare burns, and the desert pretends to be empty. Then the light dies. Darkness pours back in. Drew inches forward until he can smell cigarette smoke again. It's close now, drifting from the trench like a lazy warning. He can hear German voices, low and casual. A quiet laugh. A metal cup tapping a rifle butt. Haskett slides up beside him and lifts 2 fingers, then 3. Targets. Positions. Assignments. No one speaks. At 2:58 a.m., Haskett rises. Not fully. Just enough to run. 9 figures surge up in a single movement, boots thudding soft sand, rifles carried but not fired. For a second, the Germans don't understand what they are seeing. Their minds reach for the expected shapes, trucks, shouted commands, an artillery prelude. Instead, the Australians are already in the trench. The fight is close and fast. There is no long exchange of gunfire, no battlefield roar. It is confusion compressed into seconds, bodies colliding in narrow space, a sentry trying to shout and finding a hand clamped over his mouth. A German soldier stumbles backward and trips over a sleeping mate. Another reaches for a flare pistol and drops it when a rifle butt cracks his wrist sideways. Then it's over. Not because everyone is dead. Because the Australians have what they came for. 2 prisoners, dazed and furious. A field map folded inside a tunic. A code sheet smeared with sand. Haskett is already pulling his men back into the night before the next trench can fully wake. Behind them, someone finally screams. A flare goes up late. Rifles crack into empty darkness. The Australians are gone. Dawn brings heat and paperwork. The complaint arrives by radio first, then by written confirmation. It carries the stiff weight of authority from far away. It calls the night raids reckless. It demands restraint. It insists on proper defensive doctrine. The paper is clean. The words are sharp. The men delivering it do not smell Tobruk the way Tobruk smells. Lieutenant Colonel Carver reads the message in his bunker while dust drifts down from the roof with each distant impact. He folds the paper slowly and sets it aside, careful as if it might explode. He doesn't tear it up. He doesn't argue over the wireless. He simply looks at Captain Haskett. Tonight, Carver says, again. Because obeying the rulebook feels safe. It also gets you killed. Across the wire, Major Keller visits the forward line himself. He wants proof the stories are inflated. He wants to feel the sand and confirm the Australians are just rough troops who got lucky. He watches his sentries double up. He watches flares loaded into tubes. He watches barbed wire checked and tightened. He hears officers reassure men with crisp certainty. Stay alert, they say. The enemy is trapped. They cannot afford this. Keller believes it. He has to. At 11:50 p.m., the German flares begin their schedule. Every 15 minutes, a hiss and a bloom of white light. The trench glows, then darkens. Glows, then darkens. The men start timing their fear. At 1:30 a.m., the wind drops. That's when the silence becomes heavier. The kind of silence that makes a soldier clear his throat for no reason, just to prove he is still there. At 2:17 a.m., a field telephone rings behind Keller's position. A runner goes to answer it and finds the line dead. At 2:23 a.m., a German patrol moves forward to check the wire. They step out as a group, close together, boots scuffing sand, whispering to each other because they hate being alone. And somewhere in the dark, far too close, Private Lachlan Drew hears them coming like a herd. Haskett raises a fist. The Australians sink into the sand and let the patrol pass. The Germans never notice the shapes a few meters away. Then a flare rises early, unexpected, thrown up by a nervous hand. For 10 seconds, the desert becomes day. And Major Keller sees something that turns his mouth dry. Not a line of attackers. Not vehicles. Not anything that fits the manuals. He sees a set of faces near the wire, dark with dust, eyes bright and still. He sees the men already positioned where no man should be positioned. Close enough to touch the trench wall. The flare dies. Darkness returns. And the Australians stand up. If you think the Nazis feared Australians because they were louder or better armed, you've already missed it. They feared them because they fought in a way that made planning useless. Subscribe now, or you'll miss the next lesson. And if you won't subscribe, say why in the comments. Because what happens next is where the German line begins to bend. The next day crawls by under a hard, white sun, and by late afternoon the fortress feels like a sealed tin. The air inside dugouts is stale and hot. Flies gather wherever sweat dries. Men speak less, not because they are afraid, but because every word costs moisture. Lieutenant Colonel Carver stands over a crude sand table in a bunker lit by a single lamp. The map is weighed down by stones. His finger traces a route toward a German position on higher ground, the kind of place that doesn't look impressive until you realize what it can see. Captain Haskett listens without interrupting. He knows the target. Everyone does. It's an observation post that has been poisoning Australian movement for weeks, calling fire onto supply runs and patrol routes. It's not just a threat. It's a set of eyes that never closes. Carver's voice stays flat. They've got mines in front of it. Sergeant Keane snorts once, almost a laugh. Of course they do. Carver nods. We're not going around. The bunker goes quiet. You can feel the decision settle, heavy as a stone in a pocket. Crossing a minefield at night isn't brave in a heroic way. It's arithmetic. One misstep equals a body you can't even retrieve. One slip equals the entire team torn open before the enemy fires a shot. Haskett turns his eyes to Private Drew. You still steady on your feet? Drew doesn't smile. Yes, sir. By sundown, the raid team is bigger than last night. Not hundreds, not a wave. Still small enough to vanish. Still light enough to crawl for hours. They carry rifles, but the rifles are insurance, not the plan. The plan is silence and speed and proximity. At 1:20 a.m., they slip out. The desert is colder now, the sand gritty beneath their palms. Ahead, the minefield is invisible, which is the point. The only clue is a thin line of stakes and wire that looks casual in the dark, like it doesn't matter. Drew goes first. He lies low and pushes an open knife forward into the sand a few inches at a time. Probe. Lift. Probe. Lift. He marks safe spots with tiny stones turned a certain way, barely visible unless you know to look. Behind him, men step exactly where his knees were. They do not widen the track. They do not improvise. They become a single-file creature moving through a trap. A flare rises far to the left, lighting another sector. For a moment the world is pale and sharp. The Australians freeze, faces pressed into sand, bodies flat as blankets. The flare dies. They move again. 2 hours in, someone's sleeve snags on something buried. The cloth tugs. A heartbeat of tension. Drew reaches back with 2 fingers, gently frees it, then pauses long enough for everyone's lungs to remember how to breathe. No one speaks. Speaking would make it real. By 3:40 a.m., they are through. The German post sits above them, darker against the sky. A guard paces slowly, bored and half asleep, trusting the minefield like a wall. Haskett raises his hand. The team spreads, low and deliberate, the way hunters spread around a watering hole. Then they rise. Not shouting. Not charging from a distance. Just appearing at the lip of the trench as if the desert has decided to stand up again. The first German to turn sees faces dark with grit, eyes bright, and his brain tries to label it. Troops? Raiders? He does not get time. The position collapses fast, not in noise but in order. Wire cut. A sentry pinned. A radio operator dragged back from his set before his fingers can find the key. A notebook snatched. A map case ripped open. In minutes, the post that watched everything stops watching. And when the Australians pull away, they leave behind a silence that feels like blindness. Dawn is the most dangerous time in Tobruk, because you see what the night cost you. Men stumble back into the fortress with dust in their eyebrows and salt on their lips. They look older than they did yesterday. But in the center of the returning file, Captain Haskett carries something tucked under his arm like a wounded bird. A satchel. Not heavy. Not impressive to anyone who thinks war is only steel and explosions. But Carver knows what a satchel means when it comes out of an enemy command post. Inside the bunker, the lamp is turned low. The air is thick and still. Carver sits at a crate that serves as a desk. Haskett places the satchel down carefully, like it might bite. Sergeant Keane is there. Corporal Muir too, his hands wrapped where wire cut him. Private Drew stands near the wall, quiet, watching the officers the way a man watches weather. Carver opens the satchel. Paper. Folded maps. A code sheet. A scribbled schedule. A list of grid references marked with pencil. The kind of information that makes artillery accurate. The kind that makes an armored column safe. The kind that turns an ambush into a massacre. Carver's thumb pauses on one page, and for the first time in days his face changes. These are their tank locations, he says softly. In that moment, you can feel the siege tilt, not by miles, but by knowledge. The Germans have been moving as if no one can see them in the dark. Now the Australians have taken their eyes. Outside, British liaison officers arrive again, stiff and formal. They demand reports. They demand explanations. They demand that discipline be restored, that unnecessary risk be avoided. Haskett doesn't say much. He doesn't need to. The satchel says it for him. But the words still come down from above like a weight. Night raids are unauthorized. Night raids invite retaliation. Night raids must stop. Carver listens. Then he turns back to the papers. He understands something the rulebook can't teach. A trapped force doesn't survive by acting trapped. It survives by making the enemy feel trapped. And that is why the Nazis were terrified of Australian soldiers in a way they weren't of British or American troops in the same theater. British and American units often fought like armies are expected to fight. The Australians were making the night itself into a weapon. By the afternoon, German Major Keller's sector has changed. His sentries are no longer relaxed. Their eyes dart. Their shoulders stay raised. They keep checking the dark even while the sun is up, as if the night might return early. Because deep down, they know the truth now. The Australians have been inside their wire. And they will come again. German orders hit the forward line with the weight of embarrassment. Triple sentries at night. Flares every 15 minutes, whether you see anything or not. No sleeping in the most forward trenches. Patrols must move in pairs, never alone. Any sound in the dark must be treated as an attack. Major Keller reads the orders and feels his jaw tighten. It's not that the orders are wrong. It's that they admit something no proud army likes admitting. They are reacting. The flare schedule begins at dusk. A hiss. A bloom of white. Shadows thrown hard. Men squinting. Then darkness again. Every flare burns supplies. Every flare burns nerves. The light doesn't comfort anyone. It only proves how empty the desert looks right before it kills you. Keller walks the trench line himself. He stops beside a young sentry whose face is tight with fatigue. "You will report anything," Keller says. "Yes, Herr Major," the boy replies, too fast. Keller looks out into the darkness and sees nothing. But now he cannot trust nothing. On the Australian side, Haskett's men watch the flares like fishermen watch waves. They count the seconds. They note the sweep of searchlights. They learn the rhythm the Germans think will protect them. Then they plan to step between beats. Carver's bunker is quieter than ever. The night raids have become routine in the best way, not careless, but practiced. Men know what to strip off, what to wrap, what to leave behind. They know how long to freeze under light. They know how close they must get before they rise. Tonight, the mission is smaller. Not a major post. Not a dramatic prize. A wire-cutting raid. A quick snatch. A reminder. At 2:32 a.m., the Australians slide out and crawl toward a German sector newly thick with wire. The German command thinks the extra wire will slow them down. But extra wire also means extra confidence. And confidence is a drug. Corporal Muir reaches the first strand and begins cutting with slow, patient squeezes. The metal whispers, barely. He pauses after every cut, listening. A flare rises early. Everyone freezes. If you were there, you'd feel the panic surge, the urge to bolt, the urge to swallow, the urge to blink. But the Australians do none of it. They become sand again. The flare dies. Darkness returns. Muir resumes cutting. A German patrol approaches, boots scuffing, whispering to each other. They stop 10 meters away, scan the gap, and see nothing. They turn back, relieved, thinking the flares are working. The Australians let them go. Because the goal is not to win every fight. The goal is to make the Germans doubt every quiet moment for the rest of the siege. By dawn, Keller's men find the cut in their wire. They find a sentry missing from the end post. They find a note pinned to a board, written in rough pencil in English. A simple message. No rest tonight. Keller crumples it in his fist and feels something unfamiliar. Not anger. Fear that has learned discipline. The first time it happens, the German officers pretend it's temporary. A small adjustment, they call it. A tactical repositioning. But the truth is clearer when you stand on the sand and look at the distance. German positions begin pulling back, not meters, but kilometers. Observation posts that had been stubbornly held are abandoned. A few gun pits are destroyed before they can be captured. Wire is rolled up and moved. Trenches that used to glare at Tobruk from close range are suddenly further away. The Desert Fox's army is stepping back from a fortress it believed it could crush. Inside Tobruk, the shift feels almost unreal. Not because the siege is over. It is not. The hunger is still there. The water is still rationed. The shells still come. But the pressure changes shape. Carver walks the line at dusk and sees it with his own eyes, empty stretches of no man's land that used to be watched by German sentries. He hears fewer engines. He sees fewer flares. He feels the air open slightly, like a collar loosened by one notch. Captain Haskett meets him near a listening post. The men around them are exhausted, but there is something different in their posture now. They are no longer waiting to be killed. They are waiting to move. Carver's voice stays low. They're giving up ground. Haskett looks across the sand. They're giving up sleep, too. On the German side, Major Keller tries to keep the retreat from sounding like retreat. He writes it up in careful language. He frames it as prudence, conservation, strategic patience. But he cannot hide the morale problem. Sick calls rise. Requests for transfer multiply. Men who fought bravely in daylight now beg not to be assigned to night duty. The symptoms are convenient: headaches, stomach trouble, exhaustion. No one can prove they are faking. But Keller can read patterns, and this is a pattern. He watches his men flinch at shadows. He watches them fire at nothing when wind shifts a scrap of cloth. He watches them sit rigid, waiting for the sand to stand up. And Keller understands the terrifying part. It is not the Australians' weapons. It is not their numbers. It is that they have made normal military thinking feel useless. British and American troops, courageous as they are, often fight inside systems. Timetables, support plans, predictable phases. The Germans can prepare for that. They can anticipate it. But the Australians are attacking the one place doctrine cannot fully protect. The mind at 3 a.m. That night, Carver stands in his bunker and studies the enemy's new distance on the map. He should feel relief. Instead, he feels responsibility. Because he knows the enemy is wounded now, and wounded things can lash out. And he also knows something else. When a man like Keller stops laughing and starts pulling back, the siege has entered its most dangerous phase. The final night of this section begins with a strange calm. The wind is light. The stars are sharp. The sea to the north is a black sheet. And for a few hours, the Germans keep their distance, as if the desert itself has asked for a pause. Inside Tobruk, Carver receives a report. German armor is shifting. Artillery is being moved. Something is being prepared. It could be an attack at dawn. It could be a probe. It could be a feint. But Carver knows the danger of waiting. He calls Haskett in. He calls Keane. He points at a sector where the Germans have pulled back, leaving a gap that looks safe. Safe, Keane says, tasting the word like it's suspicious. It's a trap, Haskett replies. Carver nods. Or an invitation. They decide on a raid that will sound insane to anyone reading doctrine in an office. Not a big assault. Not a glorious push. A strike designed to answer one question: are the Germans pulling back to breathe, or pulling back to spring forward? At 2:45 a.m., a small team moves into the darkness again, slipping through a stretch of ground the Germans no longer guard as tightly. Private Drew leads, low and silent. Corporal Muir follows, wire cutters ready. Sergeant Keane brings up the rear, watching the rear the way a man watches a snake hole. The first sign of trouble is not a flare. It's the smell. Fresh fuel. Oil. Too close. Drew stops so suddenly the men behind him nearly pile into him. He raises 2 fingers, points left, then down. Tracks. Recent. A hidden vehicle position. A gun line being set up under cover of night. If you were there, you'd feel your stomach drop. You'd realize the Germans aren't just retreating. They're shifting their teeth. Haskett crawls up beside Drew and looks. In the darkness, outlines form, canvas shapes, low silhouettes, men moving quietly, trying to do what the Australians have been doing to them. Trying to become hunters. But the Germans move like soldiers pretending. They whisper too much. They bunch together. They hesitate in open ground. Their confidence is new and brittle. Haskett makes a decision fast. Not a debate. Not a committee. He signals withdrawal. The Australians slide back the way they came, every muscle tight, every breath controlled, because now the risk is not stepping on a mine. The risk is being caught between darkness and dawn. Behind them, a German flare suddenly rises, bright and angry, washing the sand in white. For a second, the Australians are exposed. And Major Keller, standing with his officers near the hidden gun line, sees shapes on the ground that should not be there. Shapes already inside the space he thought was safe. His mouth opens to shout. But the Australians are already moving again, disappearing into the dark as the flare dies, leaving Keller staring at empty sand and the echo of his own fear. Back inside the fortress, Carver listens to Haskett's report and feels the cold truth settle in. The Germans are adapting. They're trying to copy what terrified them. And that means the next phase of this story won't just be Australians hunting Germans. It will be a race to see who owns the night first. The end.